everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I was having a bit of trouble coming up with today's topic, which was going to be a dog-centric one, since last episode was not about dogs, and the episode I pre-recorded last week with a friend is not about dogs either. But luckily, one of my wonderful students at FDSA asked a really good question. I am gonna just turn my response to it into a podcast episode here. My student Cassie asked, when do you trust your dogs to hike off leash? Are there certain milestones in training you want to see first? I want my dog to be able to go exploring, but I also want her to be safe and not run off. That made me realize that I don't really have clear criteria in mind for when I would trust her off leash. I just shared my opinion on that topic. My opinion is probably not the typical US or Canadian way of living with dogs. It's just my way. It's not better or worse than what the average FDSA student probably does, but maybe it's a little different. So this is just my personal subjective answer. It is not advice of how you should live with your dog. If you feel strongly about dogs staying on leash at all times, unless in a safely fenced area, I absolutely respect your point of view. It diverges from mine, but my approach is no more or less valid than yours. First of all, when we are thinking about letting dogs off leash when we go hiking, we'll have to acknowledge something. Every time you unclip the leash from your dog's collar or harness, the risk of something happening to them is greater than if you had left the leash on. Every single time. No matter how strong your recall is. It's just like every single time you get into a car, you're putting yourself at greater risk than you would if you walked on a car-free path or took a plane, no matter how good of a driver you are. You're not the only one out on the roads, and you can't control the environment. Yet, most of us still get into motorized ground vehicles on a regular basis. Even when we're in an accident, we tend to get back in the car. We feel like the benefits outweigh the risks. Similarly, there is an undeniable risk for off-leash dogs. All off-leash dogs. You need to make your own risk assessment here. Is it worth it? Do the benefits of having your dog off leash on a hike outweigh the risks? That is a question for you, the person you are. There is no objectively right answer. Different people see this differently, and that is perfectly fine. Many people will never take the leash off their dog in an unfenced area, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with this either. You do what feels right for you and your dog. My own risk-benefit analysis in general is, of course, highly subjective. And it heavily comes down on the side of having dogs off leash. I want my dogs to be off leash. I want to maximize their freedom anywhere and everywhere I can because it makes me happy. I'm pretty sure it makes them happy too, but maybe they'd be just as happy on leash. I can't ask them. I recognize that this is more about me than it is about them. I, Chrissy, love off leash hiking. Hiking with a dog on a leash gives me significantly less pleasure than not having that leash. So an off-leash life is what I aim for. Every single time and with every single dog. I've never had a dog who didn't go off-leash hiking, and I've had breeds who are not famous for being reliable recallers, such as a dachshund and a greyhound. The benefits, from my point of view, still outweigh the risks. Part of this is probably because I grew up in Europe, and European dog culture is different than, for example, US or Canadian dog culture. We take our dogs places and we have our dogs off leash. Dogs go on trains and subways and trams and buses, and it is perfectly normal. Dogs go to restaurants with their people, and it is perfectly normal. Vienna, Austria's capital, has a law that within its city limits, you can either have your dog off leash and wearing a muzzle, or on leash and muzzle free. Guess what option I went with? And then, of course, there are dedicated off-leash, muzzle-free spaces, and some of them are giant and unfenced and do have wildlife as well. Another part is my personality. I am a freedom-loving person. I value freedom and the freedom I can give to those around me, including my dogs, a lot. Feeling locked in is the worst kind of feeling for me. So I project this on my dog. I want to maximize their freedom as well, just like my own. I value life quality over quantity in that sense, both for myself and for my dogs. I am probably not a good benchmark for a risk-benefit evaluation when it comes to dogs because as a person, I'm relatively close to the risk, freedom, and quality ends of the benefit/risk, freedom/safety, and life quality/life quantity spectrums. That said, of course I do my best to keep my dogs and everyone around us safe. I don't just let my dog run up to other leash dogs, for example. There's probably a good reason the other dog is on a leash, and neither the dog nor their human will appreciate my dog running up to them. So I want a strong recall on my dogs. I sometimes remember what my high school philosophy teacher used to say. I'm translating this freely. The freedom of my fist ends an inch from my neighbor's nose. Respecting the freedom of others is just as important to me as living my own freedom. So if my dog cannot, for example, recall away from other dogs, that dog will not be off leash around other dogs. If my dog can, they will be off leash. If my dog happens to be dangerous, that is to say, if my dog would injure other dogs or people, they will definitely not be off leash, and they may be wearing a muzzle, depending on where I'm walking. My own dog's freedom does not trump anyone else's or their dog's safety. My approach also differs depending on who a dog is when they first come to me. I will talk about puppies, adolescents, and adults. When I get a puppy around 8 weeks old, the only thing I make sure of is that the puppy is not scared of anything that is prevalent in my environment. For example, if the puppy panics when seeing cyclists and the off-leash environment available to me is an urban park with a bike path running through it, I will definitely keep the puppy on a long line there. I don't want them to bolt and run into traffic. But if I have an average puppy, that's a puppy who does not panic, they may just hesitate about approaching one thing or another in a perfectly normal way, after 1 or 2 days, that puppy will know me well and be attached to me, and I will let that puppy off-leash anywhere and everywhere it is possible to do so, and every single time I can. Why? Because puppies are dependent on us and they know it. There are very rare exceptions, but generally a puppy is not going to want to lose you. They will keep an eye on you and naturally stay close. I use this age to normalize being off-leash, and this generally transfers well into adolescence and adulthood. There may be a week or a month or two during adolescence when I need to put my puppy on a long line. Some adolescents experience a developmental leap in independence and temporarily forget their recall cue or the fact that it is wise to keep an eye on me. If that happens, I'll put them on a long line and I won't use their formal recall cue for a while. That way, I'll protect that recall until the adolescent is able to hear me again. As long as they don't practice running off, it's all good. You'll have your recall back as soon as that phase is over and your juvenile dog won't have had the chance to get into the habit of running off. I've successfully done this with every dog I've had since puppyhood. In all cases, I will use an informal puppy recall, pop, 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 as well as training a formal recall, the way that I do it in my FDSA class calling all dogs. Even though the formal recall is still under construction as the puppy grows up, I don't worry about it, because being a puppy, the dog will have the natural tendency to stay close to me even in the face of distractions. If something is tempting to them, all I need to do is call pop, 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 pop to get their attention and then run the other way. Losing me is the worst thing that can happen to a puppy, and puppies themselves make sure not to. It's like an invisible leash pulls them in the direction I'm running, away from the distraction. In puppyhood, your invisible leash is going to trump any distraction. By the time the puppy gets to a more independent age, I will have built a strong formal recall and or taught them to stay within a certain radius around me. So it becomes a non-issue. The invisible leash I got for free is weaker now, but the invisible leash I have carefully braided is strong. Alright, let's talk about adolescence. I've raised juvenile dogs for other folks when I used to live in Vienna, and I got shy as an almost adolescent. As a puppy who was just past early puppyhood. If I only get a dog at this age, and we neither have a strong personal relationship nor a carefully braided invisible leash, that is to say, through training of a formal recall cue and radius behavior, well, in that case, I will be careful. I will keep that dog on a long line until 1. I know them well and know what they are distracted by and how likely they are to go after it. Some juvenile dogs will still bond with you quickly and stay close until they feel safe and confident in the new environment, that new environment being your life they have been dropped into. In that case, I'll take off the leash. In any case, I'll take off the leash as soon as possible while in the background training a formal recall cue with distraction setups and recall games, etc. 2. If the adolescent is likely to go after a certain stimulus and forget about my existence, I will keep them on a long line until we have built a relationship and until I have trained a strong formal recall. 3. If the juvenile dog is fearful and likely to bolt, I will keep them on a long line until we have worked through the fear. Recalls fail in the face of what your dog considers dangerous, and if their natural tendency is to bolt rather than seek safety with you, keeping them on a leash is the way to go. At least anytime you are somewhere, you may run into the stimulus your dog finds scary. 4. Once I have worked through any fear and trained a strong recall and radius behavior, that dog will be off leash wherever and whenever possible, just like my puppies. Now let's talk about adult dogs. If I get a dog as an adult, this was the case for both my Dachshund and my Greyhound, and for Border Collie Mick, I'll keep them on leash until I have worked through the distraction protocol that, if you've taken my FDSA class calling all dogs, you'll be familiar with. Then they will be off leash in all appropriate areas. If there is still a particular recall challenge, let's say deer, I will work on this separately and only let them off leash in deer dense areas once I have a recall there as well. In the meantime, I will find low deer density hiking areas and they'll get to be off leash there. I also thought about giving you an example that is not related to off-leash hiking in nature, but urban off-leash freedom. The example here is Jai. Chai was not a small puppy when I got her. She was 3.5 months old. She was not quite a juvenile dog yet either. She was also scared of a couple things that were part of my typical off-leash environment, which currently are urban parks. So I kept her on a long line initially until I had worked through the fear, and then I let her drag the line, and then I had her off-leash, which is where we are now. When we're in a park, she'll be off-leash. When we're walking to the park, through the streets, she'll be on a long line or on a short leash. My current challenge with Chai is that I like walking off-leash everywhere, and that includes slow or low traffic streets with wide sidewalks. There are many of those in Mexico City. Chai is still on leash there, but I have clear criteria for when she will get off-leash privileges, just like Game. She will have to meet 3 criteria. 1, she'll have to finish working through her recall distraction tracker. 2, she'll have to have a solid waiting at curbs cue. And 3, she'll have to generalize her leave it to not stepping off the sidewalk. Game knows all these things, so Game is off-leash pretty much everywhere. Until Chai knows them too, the risks outweigh the benefits. But we're actively working on all these skills, and soon the benefits will outweigh the risks for me. Also, note that I live in Mexico City, which is an off-leash dog culture, very much unlike the US or Canada. Most people have their companion dogs off-leash in most places. So what I'm doing here is not out of the ordinary, it's pretty normal. There was another thing I wanted to share, safeguards. So my tip for anyone who wants to make sure their dog can't get lost is to get a GPS tracker for their collar or harness. It will give you peace of mind. Even if they did run off, you'd be able to find and collect them. That brings us to my personal experience with dogs running off. I've had that experience, and in my experience, dogs are smart and they will find their way back to you. I have lost dogs for a few minutes at a time. That was mostly before I was a professional dog trainer and when I didn't yet know what I was doing. Childhood dogs and stuff like that. The trick is to just wait where you last saw each other, and most dogs will easily find their way back to you. Most, but not all, will come back within minutes. They are way better at this than we humans are. Again, there are of course exceptions, but the coming back behavior is true for almost all dogs. Getting lost is something that I know happens to the occasional dog, but I have yet to meet one in person. All right, that's it for this week. Happy training, everyone. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Bye.